I'll open it up. It takes usually a couple minutes for people to filter in.
It's awesome. Am I going to see the participants on the bottom or what?
You should be able to, yeah.
Is that where they come in? There we go.
Dariana, Christopher, Jocelyn, how's it going?
We'll get started here in a couple minutes, guys. Just give people a little bit more time. Hi, Sky.
Oh, quite a few, Brandy, Christian.
So for those of you who are here already, throughout the course of the conversation, feel free to put some questions, anything you want answered in the bottom in the Q&A section or in the chat. And I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on those. And at the end of the conversation, we'll jump into some of the questions. Give a couple another minutes here, a couple minutes. You too, Sky.
That's my.
What's that?
I said definitely. Everyone's having a good Wednesday afternoon so far.
Cool. Well, in the spirit of staying on time, obviously this will be recorded, and we'll be able to catch everyone else up to speed as they join on. We have a great topic, a very timely topic to dig into today, and that is the power of an engaged brand community. How to build them, why to build them, why they're so important. And on the call today, we have Eliana Torregroza from Hook and Ladder. She runs the social media department here at Hook and Ladder, and obviously loves community, loves building brand community and nurturing those communities. We have Connor Brown, who runs the traffic and advertising department at Hook and Ladder. Also very passionate about communities, and we're very happy and privileged to have a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, a local businessman, runs YYC Cycle and YEG Cycle, has an unbelievable community of 1,000 or more in the biker gang, and hundreds of team members in Alberta. Has been a huge support of mine as I have embarked on building business, and really just a testament to building great brand and being a leader throughout that. So without further ado, again, questions. Anyone has any questions? This is Andrew. Sorry. If you guys have any questions, just again throw them into the Q&A there or in the chat, and we will get to them. So I have 6 questions that we're going to dig into, and we're all going to have opportunity to share our perspective on it. So the first one is, Andrew, I'll have you go first. Very simply, what does an engaged brand community look like to you? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, and hi everyone, the 12 people on there. Excited to see who else pops on during this time. Thanks for having me on here. When you ask a question of what a engaged brand community looks like, it can look like a lot of different things, but I think that where it starts is within the brand's pillars. What a brand stands for, what do they believe in, and taking a stand for that. I think that's incredibly important. And I think that then looking at a community that you want to attract that kind of aligns with those values, not being a jack of all trades and a nascent none, taking a stand of what your brand is positioned to create. And I think from there, it starts internally. It starts with your team. I think originally you have to have those biggest brand advocates working for you before you can create brand advocates in your customers. And conversely, I think that your best employees actually are your best customers. So they're ones that really align with that brand and that community, that vision, those pillars that you're trying to create. they love it so much that they end up just asking you for a job. So that's what I think. I think it looks very different in different scenarios, but at the end of the day, you have to understand what your business and your brand and your community stands for and what it doesn't stand for, which may be even more important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. We often say that, you know, I think human beings, they don't really want to follow fence sitters, right? If you're not taking a stand, and if you're not actually saying that, you know, hey, this is what I stand for, you're not giving people the opportunity to align themselves with you, right? Or even, you know, kind of the alternate adverse community of people that stand not with with what you stand for. I think if you aren't making that clear, then your community can get quite muddled, and the message that you want to get out there, you know, it doesn't come across very clear. So 100% agree with that, Andrew.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think a good sign of having a loyal brand community means that customers continue to engage with you beyond your products. And I think with everything that's been going on, it's so important to be and fostering that sense of community, because it means turning transactional relationships into emotional relationships. It's so important to stand for like who you are, and that they know who you are so they can defend you. For some of our brands, we see that no matter what people say, we don't even have to say it or respond to people. They're just defending the brand no matter what happens. And I also think that from a social media standpoint, a good community, they become natural content creators and ambassadors. I think that's something that we value a lot from these relationships. And we also need to provide value and offer content that really matters to them, because it's so important to not just like talk and talk. I think a good community fosters that sense of human connections. It's not something that is automated. It feels like a natural relationship.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
The fun of Zoom.
How many times has that happened over the last couple months? So I think, you know, as we know, there's many different shapes and size and styles of brand community. Some are quiet, some are loud and boisterous. Would you say that there is a common denominator, though, that one nugget that says like this is an engaged brand community versus this is just a fleeting sort of gathering of people? What would be that common denominator?
I think probably the common denominator would be, and I hate to say this when I'm talking to a marketing company, but you know, it would be how little you have to spend on marketing. You know, I think that marketing is certainly important, and you have to get the message out there, and you have to drive, you know, what you want your customers and your clients and your audience to emulate. But I think that there's a big, you know, there's a good litmus test of how engaged your community is with the amount of word of mouth that you get from them, how much they talk about your brand. And I think that that's, you know, something that's very important. You know, Eliana, you talked about that, the emotional engagement, and that works on both sides, right? If you build an engaged community and they're emotionally engaged with you, and you let them down in some way, you don't show up in the way that they expect you to, they're going to let you hear it. And I think we've seen a lot of that with brands lately. But there's a big concept in behavioral economics being social proof. And I think going back to word of mouth, I mean, word of mouth is the best social proof ever for your engaged community to grow with that.
Yeah, something that I do to analyze if it's an engaged community or not, and it's something very simple, and it's realizing if the conversation is mainly between you and them, then it's not an engaged community. If the conversation happens between the community and you're just moderating or monitoring what's going on with your brand, that's okay. But I think that's a big element that tells me if it's engaged or not. Also, I noticed that some brands, they want to force community. Like community, you can't force it. You need a segment of people, you need a mutual interest, and you need member-to-member connections. It's not something you can create or force. It's something that they help create.
Yeah, it's totally built together. As I think on that, you know, if we look at channels and we see that it's just complete, like you're using your social channels as like a bulletin board kind of thing where you're just feeding information out, and there's no, you know, conversation back to the brand, and like Eliana said, conversation within the community, I think that's a pretty telltale sign that your community isn't really engaged, or you're not in the channel that your community is actually, you know, in and they hang out in. That can also kind of be something to look out for, is, you know, really understanding where your community likes to interact, and then having a presence, you know, in those spaces, and trying to, instead of trying to force somebody and force the community into, well, we post on Facebook, so you have to be on Facebook, you know, if it's a forum online even, right? Like that, some of those forums are some of the strongest communities out there. And so I think there's a lot of different elements, and that, like Caleb said, you know, it's not one size fits all, but I think that core pillar is really, what's the conversation like? Is there conversation being had? If there's no conversation being had, if it's a one-way street, pretty good sign that you don't have an engaged community.
With all this talk about brand community and strong brand communities, why is building one, why is nurturing one so important, especially now?
Yeah, I can take the first step on that. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately in regards to like the fundamentals, right? I go back to like first principle thinking. And I think when we look at marketing, it can be so complex and there's so many different things that you can do. But I think it comes down to two core principles. One of the cores is community, where the other core is conversion, right? And I think that in order to get that conversion, which is where a lot of, you know, our clients first come in, we need to get that sale. We need to get people signed up on, you know, lead magnet or whatever. If we don't have that community where we can, you know, have conversations, monitor those conversations, and understand, you know, what our customers are actually looking for from us, it makes it extremely hard to really benefit on the conversion side. So I think that's one of the reasons, I guess, you know, this is coming from more of a traffic and advertising standpoint, but one of the main kind of purposes of that community is to be able to, you know, utilize that community and unlock that and transfer that emotional relationship into business value, right? And so I think that it's a bit of a catch-22 where, you know, you need to really focus on nurturing the community, caring about, you know, what they actually care about, to be able to see where your products and where your services can provide value to that community. And then that's how you kind of unlock that conversion side of things.
Rocket, Eliana.
Well, I think maybe Andrew, you can share more about your experience, but I think customer retention is a big one here. Sometimes keeping these customers engaged, it's just or even more important than gaining new first-time customers. So what do you think has been your experience with everything that's been going on in terms of customer retention?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really interesting to see kind of, especially in the fitness industry, you know, we've had lots of different pivots. For us, we shut down and we were closed for 4 months. We decided not to go online and do online classes and so on, because we really believe that we are more than just spin. And so we tried to provide support and engagement with our community, with, you know, mental health resources, connecting them with, you know, contests that we're running, bringing them into the lives of our people that they're so used to creating those relationships with. But, you know, I think Connor, you filled out part of the piece of that answer, but and Eliana, you filled out another part of the piece. But I think what joins it together is really the customer journey. So you have to really understand what the journey is when, you know, how you're going to get noticed as a brand, how you're going to bring people in and find that first transaction. But, you know, that's really the beginning. From there, you have to understand what the journey is. You know, how often do you want your customers to be utilizing your brand? What's the value proposition that you have from the beginning? And then also, you know, customer lifetime value is a huge metric that you want to build out. But being, you know, for every customer, how long on average will they stay engaged and be an active customer or client or member of your community? You know, what is the frequency at which they use your product or service? But in the meantime, you know, we try so hard to you know, sometimes it's with personal relationships just as much as professional and business relationships, where we try to win people over so much, whether or not that's advertising to tell people that we're so great, or to give them an offer to come in the door, or to you know, take a girl or guy out on a fancy date to try to convince them that they should be with you. But then after that, it's really about that nurturing of the relationship, where, you know, those little things of, you know, giving to, you know, celebrating their 1 year anniversary, you know, celebrating milestones with them along the way to make sure that they feel special, and also are convinced that you haven't forgotten about them, and the money that they're spending within your business is actually being valued. Because nowadays there's competition is everywhere, and what distinguishes whether or not you succeed and build a loyal community is that engagement and nurtured relationship.
Yeah, I think it's super important, and we get this question a lot whenever we're talking about social, and then we integrate with advertising, and they say like social media doesn't have a return on investment. And of course, the sense of the community and the community creation is not something that it's not a marketing strategy, but it does help the marketing programs. So you can increase retention, you can increase purchase frequency, increase brand awareness that is so expensive, brand loyalty that sometimes you can't buy it. And of course, decreasing costs. Sometimes the best feedback that you can get is from like your natural ambassador or your community member, because customers are one thing, but I think communities are like the next level. And like I said, you can't force it, but there's something that you can get just from them. And it's like the most valuable thing that you can get from a business, in terms of like getting that feedback live, and keeping them engaged is so important, or even more, like I said, that than getting new customers. So in terms of revenue generation, but I also think word of mouth, like you said, Andrew, and then feedback and innovation. I think those are like the main takeouts from a community as well.
Mm-hmm. I think building a brand and building a business is hard enough as it is amongst your leadership team. And one of the biggest impacts and benefits of having that engaged community is almost they can be a part of the decision-making process. They can help sort of break a tie when you're torn between which way you should go. So I think we need to look at the brand communities as well as a member of, you know, maybe not the leadership team, but a member of the decision-making team as it relates to your company, which is an invaluable asset to have, right? Connor, I'll jump to the next question unless you had anything on that.
No, I think you guys, it's covered really, really well.
Are there, building an engaged community and nurturing one is a very, very complicated, well, it can be, but it also can be very simple. It's a complicated cake or a pie to make. And if we took a cake and you have ingredients in a cake, are there any you know, standard necessary ingredients that need to be in place for you to have a chance at building an engaged community and then nurturing it subsequently? You talked about pillars, Andrew. I think that's probably one of it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I think it all starts with your team and your family internally, and having them responsible as well and feel responsible and engaged with that community. You know, we've got someone that's watching right now. Ben co-host was one of our incredible motivators that we've had, and, you know, allowing each member of your community to take ownership of the relationship that they have with members and customers and so on. I mean, when we talk about spin studios and what we have, like, it's an intimate environment that they're stuck with that person for 50 minutes. And so, you know, making it their own. I know that Ben, for instance, always had a guess this artist track, you know, and I think people just want to feel like they're interacting with another human being. You know, Ileana, you talked about that too. And I think that there's a lot of bots out there. There's a lot of communication platforms, but I think people value brands that even take that extra step, even if you're sending automated emails out, to make it a little bit more personal. So that does have that voice and message. But when you talk about ingredients, I think the whole recipe is ruined if you don't have the right people internally. And people is always the toughest part of a business. It always takes the most effort, but it's also the most rewarding when you have an aligned group of people that work for you, that believe in what you're trying to build. So that's the most important part, is your team.
I love it. Yeah, I think this will sound pretty cheeky, but I think a community needs to be done out of love. If you're passionate about what you do and who you're doing it for, I think if you learn to love your community, to give them, to involve them and make them feel excited, you'll get 1,000 more in return. Like, it's super important to make it with love, and they will know when you have like a more promotional driver inside of you. And I also think you have to be generous. Sometimes we expect to get likes, comment, purchases, like the smallest thing, and you're not liking their pictures. You're not proactively engaging with them. So from a social media perspective, you have to give. So take the time to comment their posts, offer value, do contesting strategies. Like, there's so many ways to give them, and you don't have to spend $100,000 to do that. So they have to know that you care. And then I think the local component is also very important. Like, of course, there's communities, let's say Lululemon, McDonald's, Starbucks, but I love that local component to be part of the community. I think sport teams are doing it so well, and all the fitness industry, beauty brands, I think the local component, it's been trending with everything that's going on. And I think that helps with that sense of community and openness between the members.
I'm going to take a bit of a different approach to kind of the fundamental pieces. I agree, definitely, people and approaching it with love and with nurturing. But I think one of the quintessential things and kind of mechanisms to have in place is actually, having somewhere, and it doesn't need to be physical or it doesn't need to be digital either, but just having a place where people gather, right? Because where people gather is where they have conversations, and those conversations is where, that emotional connection gets deeper, and where we become more human as a brand and less, this kind of cold face. So by, if it's your Instagram channel, if it's Facebook, or if it is actually like, a spin studio, having that place where people can come together as a community and have those conversations, I think is like that is, to me at least, one of the most important things.
And it's funny you call it a spin studio. I've experienced YYC Cycle. It's more of a club than anything. It's like the greatest pump up. It's unbelievable. It's also one of the hardest workouts I've ever done in my life. Like, I was done. Andrew, I'm curious. I've never asked you about this, but how closely similar is the culture within the studios on the bikes, like in that hour session, as compared to some of the comment threads? Because when I was in there, it was energetic. People were talking to other people across the studio on the bike, like high fives. Well, not high fives anymore, but that kind of thing. How does that parallel with what you're seeing in channel?
What do you mean by seeing in channel?
So the energy and the support and the kind of love that I saw people expressing in the studio, are you seeing that same flavor show up on Instagram? And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think they are very paralleled. I think there is a lot of similarities within that. It's interesting because consistency is so key, right? And I think that would be a really good telltale sign of whether or not you do have a strong brand community, whether or not it is parallel or not. If it's not, then again, like Connor said, you might be on the wrong platform, engaging with, if the community that you have in that physical location or even that online location, and what you use for marketing and communicating with your customers outside of the actual transactional location. If it's different, then chances are you're not on the right platform marketing wise. But I think that maybe one of the elements online is that people people are not afraid to be outspoken online. And I think that it challenges you really well. I think that we've seen it with, currently with COVID and everything that's been going on. We've seen it with the Black Lives Matter movement that's been recent. And I think that it's such an absolutely important topic to have conversations about. And I think that brands are being asked to be transparent about what's going on in their brands. What plans do they have with regards to diversity and equity and inclusion, and something that has really shown that brands need to be accountable, not only in their studios and the environment that they're creating there, but also how they're communicating with their audiences, marketing wise. So I think there is a lot of consistencies there. But I think that be another telltale sign whether or not you're on the right platforms or not. Connor, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, definitely, I think being on the right platforms, it could also be that, in your physical location per se, if the conversations are different, that there might be a disconnect between what you're actually offering and what people are looking for, right? Because if in your location everything is hoity-toity and really, really good, but then online you're just getting torn apart, people probably aren't comfortable with giving that feedback in person, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're more comfortable with that online. And so it might be an opportunity to take a look at, definitely, are we on the right channel? Is this our actual community? And two, is there consistency between, how we actually act and what we're saying online? Yeah. Eliana, what do you think?
No, I agree. And I think it's not only making sure you're in the right channel, but also getting feedback and asking them, like, what do you need from me? Like, you're offering what they really want to hear, to educate, to have fun, like why are they part of the community? So I think starting with the why, it's one of the Hook and Ladder favorite books. And understanding that you need to provide content based on the stage in the value journey that they're living. Like, we have to admit it, being part of a community is intimidating when you're like there for the first time. So I think another element is providing content that helps encourage those conversations, and then for members to feel welcomed. And then if they're part of the community, let's say they've been there for years, how do you keep them excited? So I think content is the fuel to keep the community excited. And also I think we need to provide a healthy environment for new people who are there, like they've been for a long time, and people who are like thinking about leaving. Sometimes you get what you want from a community and you just leave. So I think content is another big element as well.
Andrew, you've built a great community with the biker gang and all of your staff. And what's your guys' responsibility to that community now that you've built them? Because it's a privilege to be a part of a community like that and have a hand in leading a community like that. What's your responsibility and your team's responsibility?
For sure. Great question. And Jocelyn, I see that you asked a question there. I'm excited to answer that as well later, but it is a huge responsibility. I think that, and we'll jump into that with regards to kind of business to business communities and so on. I think that business to like B2C companies and communities, you have to be as open and transparent and vulnerable as possible. I think that no one's perfect, but you have to really try to set the example properly, because when you as a leader or as a company, go against the values and the pillars that you've been preaching, whether or not it's for a month or a year or 6.5 years for us, but when you go against the pillars, it really creates a ripple effect. And, just like a personal relationship, I think trust is everything. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be perfect, but I think a brand's ability to go on and say that you've messed up, and that you're working towards better solutions and so on. I mean, we've kind of going back, it's very relevant with the Black Lives Matters movement and creating more diversity and equity and inclusion in the workplace is so important. And I think for us, that was you know, we've always really welcomed a diverse community, but there's still so much more that we can do, and there's things that we haven't even noticed that we do that have maybe you know, excluded certain people from having opportunities to come into our environment, whether or not that's a hiring process or how we market, or, you know, having more diversity within our marketing message. You know, this is an important thing to talk about, and not be afraid to talk about, and not be afraid to have those conversations with. So when you talk about the responsibility as a brand, I think for the leaders of any brand, it's to be able to be self-reflective, to not act like you know everything, and to be open and vulnerable when you fuck up, to be honest with that, and ask for help, you know, and not be defensive of your brand. I think a lot of business owners are so proud of the brands that they've built that they do get defensive, and I've caught myself in that too. But you never learn by being that way. You know, someone's giving you their honest opinion, and it's worth listening to. So that's my answer for that one.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I would say the responsibility is quite, you know, quite high. I think that, you know, as a business, if you are leading that community, right, a leader in my mind is somebody who, you know, is first off the line, is the first through the door, right? And so I think that as things happen in the world, your community looks to you and looks to see how you're going to actually respond to that, to be that signal, to maybe take that really uncomfortable step so that you can pave the way forward for other people in the community to do the same. So I think it is quite important to keep in mind, you know, your positioning within that community. And like Andrew said, I think lean into the fact that we're all human beings, right? Nobody's perfect. And I think we're seeing a big shift in marketing and within business of businesses just getting more real, right? Understanding that it's a complex world out there. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. And what's going to help, you know, everybody move forward is to have conversations and to, you know, have a place where it is okay to fail, and it is okay to, you know, seek assistance and seek help instead of being just this perfect entity. Because if you set yourself up and you position yourself to be perfect, that first mistake that you make that's going to cripple you quite heavily, right? Whereas if you lean into the fact that we're all real, we're all human beings, this is what we think right now, right? But if we receive new information, that can change, and that's okay, because we're educating ourselves. It's almost like kind of the, you know, don't want to get into politics here at all, but I think if politicians made a little bit of a stance to kind of, you know, be okay with changing their mind, right? I would way rather vote for somebody that is comfortable enough saying that they're wrong, and being able to own that and then move forward like a human being does. And so I think that the responsibility is quite high, and it's all centered around kind of the conversation and what you stand for.
Yeah, I think transparency is one of the biggest one. And I also think creating guidelines, especially when you have close communities, let's say Facebook groups and everything. It's so hard when conflict comes out of nowhere. So you need to know how to manage those conversations. Some people are comfortable with that, but I think having strong guidelines from the beginning is very important. And then be transparent, like, if you need to take it offline, if you want to encourage the conversation there, I think it's good. And also give it, like, even if you have guidelines, giving the freedom that they will be talking about you, even if it's not always good things, you're just like, they're not fans, you know, like they're part of that community. So you need to be able to have a plan in place if like things are not going like you expected. So I think the other responsibility is choosing, like going back from the beginning, if you want an open community and a closed community. I think we got a question on the more like the partner relationships and when it's not B2C. So I think closed communities are very important as well. And there, the strong guidelines are even more important, because you don't need to limit communication, but you have like VIP access. So the more exclusive, the stronger community that you have. And then like they have different types of conversations and they have more access to information. So I think that responsibility of creating the guidelines is huge, especially when you're doing social media for closed communities. And also I think forming a community requires more than just gathering people in one place. Let's say in the studio, like there's way more to that if you have any other communities. And I'm sure you guys are doing it pretty well because you see the results. So I think the responsibility is also understanding that it's not just gathering a bunch of people in one place, it's actually furthering that conversation and making sure it's a safe place for every community member. I think that's very important as well.
I know, Andrew, you wanted to answer Jocelyn's question there, so I'll just read it out. Thanks, Eliana, for jumping on that. So the conversation is centered around brand community, primarily in a direct B2C world. How do you recommend building an engaged community when the sales strategy is working through channel partners rather than direct to consumer?
Yeah, and I think that's amazing, Jocelyn. And it's been about a year that I rebranded my dad's business and actually launched Culinary Co-working, which is a B2B kind of environment. It's a co-working space for the culinary industry, and we do deal with a lot of partners in that. And whether or not it's food producers or kind of the vertical supply chain within the agriculture and food industry. I'm definitely not going to say that I'm an expert at this, but the crack at an answer that I would have with this, Jocelyn, is I would take the same fundamental principles as far as relationship building. I mean, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is just like, everybody on this call is like, yeah, for sure, I read that. But really it's down to the fundamentals of that. So, if you're working with another business, like remember the date that you guys had your first email together. Remember the names of people. Don't, really address people by name. Remember the date that you started your contract with them and put that as a note in your calendar to send them a reminder a year later, just to be like, hey, I'm so appreciative. This has been 1 year since the first email that we've exchanged, or since we first started our business relationship. I just want to let you know how much it's mean to our community. I think just those kind of fundamentals of relationship building are great. And the second thing too, and it's something that I've talked with Caleb as well about, is that you don't have to act like, and Connor said too, you don't have to act like you're perfect. In fact, when you put the image across as being perfect, that's when people, don't trust you, because no one's perfect. And perfection is pretty boring. So what attracts humans to humans is the imperfections. When you see someone screw up, but then learn from it and grow from it, then you feel like you're kind of on the same level with them. So Jocelyn, I think the other thing too is once you have your pillars of kind of what the company stands for and who you guys deal with, and making sure that the other businesses that you deal with align with that, I think that's great. And then also bringing them into your company. We're very proud to have the biker gang that selects charities that we raise money for, bringing them into that decision process. And I think showing them your cards and saying, hey, we're really trying to refine this system within our company, and we need your help because you're a valued customer and we value your opinions. And then they feel an ownership as being part of the relationship. And so I'm still learning that on the culinary co-working side, but that would be my best crack at answering that question. Eliana, do you have any comments on that, or Connor?
Yeah, like some of our clients are franchisees, and they also it's a franchisee model. So we have to deal with both the client and the franchisee. So we've noticed that something pretty basic that I love doing is spending a day with them, see how it is. Sometimes to be able to understand someone, you have to go with them, be there for them, right? And that means understanding how their day is. So when we go to their businesses, we spend a day there. Sometimes just the objective or the purpose is to take some pictures, but you learn so much about their histories, about how their day goes. And that helps for so many things, to understand the business and also to even speak their language. So sometimes you want to stay in the strategy, right, and do so many things that in the execution, you forget why you're doing this. So I would say just go spend a day with them and understand what they're going through, and have an open communication, transparency. I think that's key, and you guys said it. So I think that's key for building more like a partner relationship kind of style.
Yeah, I think like I couldn't agree more with kind of Andrew's approach of going down to the principles and the fundamentals, because we often hear B2C, B2B. Yeah, I think we've said this before in the meetups, is that we really believe in human to human marketing. And so when we look at a business relationship and two different businesses entering in a relationship together, at the end of the day it's still human beings. And human beings, I think we're all in a search for some sort of value and some sort of transformation. So I think if you're working with channel partners, and maybe it's not going to be your Instagram page, right? Like that's not the place where they're hanging out. Maybe it is if you have a channel partner monthly meetup, or if it is through an email network and that sort of thing, right? Is understanding where that communication happens, and then searching for ways that you can provide value and facilitate conversation within the community. So if the channel partners are all competitors, this might be a little bit more difficult, but if they're like-minded services or complementary or supplementary services, introducing them to each other and being that facilitator of community, being like, I work with you over here and I work with this person over here. I really think you guys should meet and chat. Sometimes going that extra effort to be that facilitator, instead of feeling like you're having to just feed your message down people's throats, is to focus on that connection. How can you create connections between your brand and your channel partners, or your channel partners within themselves, and understanding first and foremost of who your community is, what do they see as value, and then finding all of the different ways that you can deliver that value to those people.
Finding the right channels as well, because some of our clients are like, I want a Facebook group to communicate with the franchisees, or I want to get content from them. But some of them are really active. Let's say their employees are like 30 years old. They love Facebook, they love Instagram. But some people, they just love a phone call or meet in person, go and grab a coffee. So I think understanding how they think, what they want to talk about, and where. I think that's important too. You don't have to be everywhere. Sometimes for a business, you don't need an Instagram page. Maybe you just need a Facebook group. Sometimes you have to be everywhere, or is it LinkedIn? So I think that's pretty important as well, knowing where to chat and create those conversations with them.
Glad you brought up LinkedIn as well. I think we're going to see a lot of growth within that channel over the next few years. I know that they're doing a lot of development as well. So some of those business to business relationships, we could start seeing more communities and more groups emerging on LinkedIn, and it could be things centering a group around a topic instead of just what your brand is more. Say you run some sort of like a sales coaching program, is it's kind of like set up a group for sales experts or something like that. That's kind of a bad example, but you get where I'm going with that. Or it doesn't need to be around your business. It can be around a topic. It can be around a theme. And as long as you're facilitating that and kind of allowing those conversations to happen and nurturing those conversations, I think you'll have a strong community.
Yeah. Well, is that funny? Because our next question is actually very much in line with the question that Brandy posed or posted into the question and answer section there. So the next question is, what are some common pitfalls or mistakes made when building and nurturing a community? And before I let you go on that, I just want to make sure it is what Brandy asked. What would you say are the watch outs to consider before deciding to create an online? Okay, so these are a little bit different, but I'll let you answer them both. Brandy's was, what would you say are the watch outs to consider before deciding to even create an online community in the first place? So Eliane, I'll toss that one to you first.
Yeah, I think first is understanding the why. And I think, I've said it before, but finding the right channels, understanding the why you're creating the community. Like Connor said, the community has to be about the market, not the product. Actually being proactive and creating content for them. And then also creating guidelines, like I said before. I think that's very important. Understanding that things won't go well like all the time. So you need to, I think it's connected to your next question, like I will touch base on this later, but what we can do when something is controversial. Because some brands are just like avoiding conflict all the time and removing comments, like never do that, like people notice. So I think it's important to have the guidelines and a plan on how you will react based on the community. and going back always to that common interest and understanding that it can be regional, it can be a passion, sport. So always going back to that, and be ready. It's not just creating the community and leaving. You need to spend a lot of time with them, especially on social media. You have to use content all the time and go back to that why and keep reinforcing, keep people engaged. So I think having one person to engage with them all the time is important, because conversation won't just happen all of a sudden. Even if they love your product, you need to set some guidelines and keep asking questions. I think that's very important as well. And be more proactive. They won't just know that your community exists. So how do you increase awareness that we have this community, inviting people, and using every channel that you need to make it, maybe it's not like a big community that you need to have, but engaged is even more important. So I think those are the first things to consider.
I'd also say, really, if you're just starting to embark on community building and engagement and nurturing, is to do some really heavy listening to start out with, and maybe look at other brands or other similar communities and start to analyze, where are they hanging out? Where are the conversations happening? Because I think a lot of the time, we have our own biases, and especially when it's our own business, of like, this is what people want. This is where people are, where we don't take the time to really just look and listen and analyze what's happening with those people. What conversations are they having right now? And then forming your strategy, around what's actually happening in the market versus just what you think is happening. So that's kind of one thing I would look out for right at the start is, are there other communities online that are like yours? And with that, what can you learn from them, and how can you make it better? Because if you can create a better community for those individuals, you might see them start to migrate as well. So really listen, I think, instead of worrying about what you're going to say, I'd really worry about how am I hearing this information that they're giving me.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm going to layer another one on here, Brandy, to answer your question. And I think that I totally agree with these two on that topic. But I think that a lot of people, and maybe I'll get a few yeses in the comments. I think a lot of people are afraid of creating an online community, especially nowadays, because it's pretty fiery out there. And when you're online, it's an opportunity to speak your mind. So I think that creating an online community, and I think people should speak their minds. But I think creating an online community, there should be some ground rules, and you should hold pretty damn firm to those ground rules. And they're fundamental human right ground rules. Anything other than that, letting the conversation free flow is great. But if there's any kind of hate speech or disrespectful communication, I think that's when us as brand leaders, you have to step in and you have to support your community that aligns with those fundamentals against those that just don't. And those that don't, they will find another online community that fits their purpose. I think to Connor's point on the listening, I think that and I've learned this as well through my time, is asking more questions and asking people, especially if it's an online community, just a simple question of, can you help me understand that a little bit more? Can you help me understand that question a little bit more? Can you help me understand that statement and where it's coming from? Engaging in that free-flowing conversation is great. Eliana, I agree, deleting comments doesn't get by anybody these days, and it's not the right move to do. There's a very easy way if someone is making comments that you feel are maybe attacking or not within those ground rules. It's very easy to say, if Connor's attacking me online, it's very easy for me to say on a message or saying, Connor, I appreciate your passion with this subject, and I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with you. My email is andrew.obrecht@yyc-cycle.com. Please send me an email, and I would be happy to engage in a conversation. Now, here's the trick, though, is that if Connor does engage with me, then you do pick up the phone and you do call and you do organize a FaceTime, because again, I think transparency is totally key. So if you're trying to get them off your channels in communication, at least give them a platform that they can speak their mind for you. And at the end of the day, the beauty about this world is that everybody has a different opinion, and it doesn't have to be your opinion, but I think it's important to listen out there. So, Brandy, there's nothing wrong with standing up for the guidelines of your community. And then if you feel like something's getting out of hand, don't just delete it. Like Ileana says, give them an opportunity to take the conversation offline, but really stand for those ground rules. And really, at the end of the day, it's just the ground rules of treating people respectfully. I think other than that, the free flow of communication is great.
You said something interesting there, Andrew. It's tying back to one of your, I think, original comments about defensiveness, right? I think that when you start to get defensive is where things can start getting a little squirrely. Where the opposite, in my mind, of defensiveness isn't actually offense, it's empathy. And so if you can start to, interact with that person with more empathy, and like you said, help me understand that, I really want to understand, make sure that I'm hearing you for what you're saying, and taking that conversation offline where applicable. I think that your community will also see that. So if you write back to somebody and it's really negative and it's angry, right? Your community is watching that. They're seeing how you're reacting. But if you take somebody who is, might be a little off the rocker, so to speak, in regards to what they're saying online, and you kind of treat them with that love and with empathy, and you say, hey man, I really want to have a conversation with you. Let's here's my email. I really want to chat with you. Your community will see that, and they'll see that you're handling things with love and with empathy. And, that's where I think you can have that start to be reciprocated in your community as well, and really create a good space for everybody involved.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
No.
I mean, even recently over the last few months, I've had opportunities to learn that wait a second, I should have taken some time and just asked a few more whys, right? It's the most powerful question. And so I'm still learning that as a leader, but I think through that, if I can pass that on to people listening right now, it's taking a second and just, asking for maybe a little bit more clarification, because on online communities, the tone and the context of which things are asked and said are not necessarily always read in the same way as they're intended. So having a little bit more patience is something that all of us, including myself, can continue to learn. So.
Well, part of it too is if you're a part of a community, every member as a part of a community should be held accountable too for things they say. So part of you, Andrew, in saying, email me, is kind of asking you to, step up and tell me what you really think, right? And that's part of being a healthy community too, is not being afraid of asking people to, step up and say what they really want to say. So there's tons of, there's thousands and thousands of great brand communities, and ones that inspire us more or less than others, depending on who you are. But I'll throw it to Andrew first. Is there any either local or national or international brands that you think do a exceptionally well job at building and nurturing community? Yeah, and if so, why?
Yeah, there's a lot of great brands out there, as you said, so I could probably rattle off a bunch, but one that I've been a huge fan of is Zappos. I think they're an amazing brand out there, and I think that, one of the things, if some of the listeners haven't read Delivering Happiness, it's an amazing book by the CEO, Tony Hsieh, and Zappos, just their customer service and who they bring on. Like when they do their interviews, one of the interview questions is like, from 0 to 10, how weird are you? And like, I don't think they have a number that they go for, but if you're not able to say that, you're like, well, I'm probably like a 5 to 7 out of 10 weird, or it's like, that's it goes back to the whole imperfection thing. It's like, you're someone that's not afraid to laugh at yourself, and people can really relate to that. But second of all, I think that their customer service is amazing, being an online brand, and having kind of one of the contingencies that they have for customer service and the people that are answering the phone. And you hear about like Nordstrom doing this kind of stuff, but it's like, it's not how many phone calls you can do, during a day. It's actually how long you can stay on the phone with someone until their problem is resolved. And I really enjoy that part of their business. And I think it's really grown this amazingly engaged brand community that their customers know that they're going to be taken care of. And it starts, from the first question that we talked about today. It starts from your employees and your internal team being aligned with that, and whether or not that's like everybody has to be a 7 on the weird scale to whatever else it is. I think it starts with them, and then it's the ability to build that foundation that can connect with their audience. So yeah, Zappos I'm a big fan of their company.
Definitely 10 out of 10 weird, I'd say. For this guy. I think it's interesting because I look and I think locally, obviously I think YYC Cycle, like you guys do a phenomenal job. I think another one is Plant down in Inglewood. I mean, I remember I was just sort of driving through Inglewood, right, kind of when things were back to starting to be open. And every time I drove by, there was a lineup of like 10, 20 people outside the store. And I think that is such a signal that they offer something to, people that love plants that they can't really find anywhere else. They're a really, really strong local community. And there's probably a lot that, everybody can kind of learn from what they're doing. I think in terms of a national one, the one that comes to mind for me is Patagonia. It's not necessarily that they have like really strong social or anything like that. They have just an incredibly strong content. But what that content is centered around, their community is so passionate about, wildlife conservation and keeping the wilderness, that I think they've just done a phenomenal job of not only, growing within people that are like kind of the ultra wilderness people, but even into like urban centers like New York, kind of offering some of those more urban brands and starting to bring that ideology into the big cities. I think it's pretty wild to kind of see that journey of how Patagonia has navigated that, because I know when they first kind of were releasing that more urban line, a lot of their original community members were questioning them quite heavily, right? And I think they've been able to navigate that space really well and maintain that integrity. Yeah, so that's what I'd say. I see a question from Dariana. The name of that company is Plant. They're just down in Inglewood.
I love their plants.
Yeah, me too.
I need to show you all my plants, but that can be another webinar. There's something that I love, like one of the brands that I think are doing it pretty well. It's Ito Japan. It's one of our clients. We got a tweet the other day from a girl saying, if I get a tattoo of your brand, what are you willing to give me? I think that's another level of being like loyal to a brand, and she was willing to do it, but we were like, oh my God, that's a good story, but it's crazy, like I think that's where you see actual community and people who love your brand. Like I don't know if you've heard, it's a beauty brand, Glowsure. I don't know if you've seen it before, but they're building basically a beauty business empire with Slack, Instagram, and selfies. If you see their social, it's amazing how everything for the beauty industry has to be like perfect studio photography and everything, but they actually credit 90% of their growth to brand announcement, any Instagram post, everything they do is so I love what they're doing. And also Starbucks, the way they're doing all their strategies, if it's marketing or not, I love going there. Even if I'm Colombian, their coffee is not the best, but I just love going there because of the experience, in terms of having, they don't have employees, they have partners. I think that's how they call them. So I think it also starts by leveraging your employees, like Andrew said, and creating that family around your brand. So it's not only people outside your community, like the community has to be people from the store to the rest of the city. I think it starts at home. So I would leverage all that power, and I love how Starbucks is doing it too.
Thank you, that's awesome. Well, I'm a big fan of staying on time, and I want to be super respectful of everybody's time, including Andrew. Thank you again. I know there's lots of stuff going on for you that makes life exciting. And what we're going to do, there was another question in there from Benita there. It was more about video, but we'll answer that afterwards. I want to thank everyone for coming and taking time out of their afternoon to dive into an awesome topic. Really exciting conversation. What we'll do is stay tuned for an email shortly, later on this afternoon or evening. We'll have the recording of this if you wanted to go back and extract any nuggets that you missed. There'll be a couple cool resources in there for you as well to take advantage of if you have some conversation or questions about community, brand community, social media. Just a couple quick buttons in there if you are looking for some resources around that. So Andrew, thank you very much. Connor, thank you very much. Eliana. Andrew, what's next in the world of YYC? What's exciting right now?
Well, we're just happy to be back open. So we're going to kind of keep building momentum here and obviously keep the community safe. And we're excited for the University District coming in the winter this year. So just weathering the storms, sending good vibes to all the fitness community out there, navigating this craziness together. But if we all work together, we're going to get out of it together as well. So,
yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Thank you all.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah.